Today on Cancer Buzz, the unique needs of the young adult patient population.
So many of my fellow patients that I've spoken to, we're so often misdiagnosed. It's just not on the minds of many oncology groups. And so they're figuring it out too. So I hope that these conversations will become part of the protocol and part of the norm when addressing younger cancer patients.
Welcome to Cancer Buzz. I'm your host, Summer Johnson. The National Cancer Institute recently released a study that said the median age for a person diagnosed with cancer is 66. So when a person between the ages of 30 and 50 is diagnosed, not only do they face unique personal challenges, but they also face a care continuum that wasn't necessarily designed for them. Laura Holmes Haddad was 37 years old and juggling many roles in life. A mother of 2 young children, a wife, caterer, cookbook editor, and freelance writer. Her diagnosis of stage 4 inflammatory breast cancer came as a shock, and her years-long battle forced unwelcome changes not just to her own life, but also to the lives of those who depended on her. Holmes Haddad also found herself experiencing challenges that her care teams were less equipped to support, including fertility, finances, childcare, and marriage. We spoke with Holmes Haddad, who is now in survivorship care, about how oncology programs can better prepare for younger adults with cancer.
I bought a one-way ticket to New York, and I said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to work in New York at a magazine or publisher. I got a job at Simon & Schuster in a cookbook division. And then I was there for 4 years, and then I went freelance, and then did freelance until literally the day before I got diagnosed. I was supposed to do a cupcake book with a famous chef, and then I got diagnosed. So crazy. I was like, oh, I have a little cancer, but I'll be back like 6 months. Hold on. I didn't want to lose the gig,
You were married and your kids were little. Describe that shock on a young family.
That summer, I had just turned 37. My son was just about turning 1, and my daughter was 4. And I had always been really healthy. And because it was my second child, I thought that the physical changes I saw were just from breastfeeding and from having a baby. And then I was weaning him, and I kept having pain in my left breast. But I think many moms and parents in general can identify with this. You think, I'm too tired, I'm too busy, I'm not going to go to the doctor. So I waited a couple of months, and then the pain was so bad that I went to my GP, and she diagnosed me with mastitis. But I knew it wasn't mastitis, but I said, okay, I'll take the antibiotics. And she said, just to be sure, in 2 weeks, I want you to see a breast surgeon. So 2 weeks later, I went, and I walked in, and she said, I don't want to alarm you, but I'm concerned. And within 5 days, I found out that I had invasive breast cancer, a very rare form called inflammatory breast cancer that affects 5,000 women a year in the US. And without treatment, I was given about 2 years to live because the pain that I was feeling was an 11-centimeter tumor sitting on my left breast, and it had attacked the lymphatic system as well.
How did your husband react to that?
Oh, I'll never forget. We got the news over the phone because it was the day after Thanksgiving. It was the morning after Thanksgiving. And we were just shocked because, especially those 2 weeks, everyone around us kept saying, cancer doesn't hurt. You're too young to have cancer. Fill in any of those phrases there. And he was just shocked. We both were just completely couldn't digest the information. And then as I went and kept in shock mode, he and my sister and my parents went into complete go mode. What do we need to do? Action plan. And what can we do to keep Laura alive?
So I imagine at that point in your life, you feel that everything is under control and that you're invincible and you're in your mid-30s, and then this happens. Describe that shift in your self-confidence and your life.
I think for any patient to say to the medical community, I trust you and I'm putting my trust and faith in you because this is your job. And then to have to also rely on everyone around you, it was so hard to not be able to fight for myself in a way that I had always done. Having two children, anytime you feel like, especially as a woman, that you can do something, and then this was so out of anything that I had ever known, and I was paralyzed by fear. After a year of that, it's very hard emotionally.
At some point, you started looking for some outside support.
So the number one thing that saved me throughout, in addition to my family, though, was having a oncology social worker that was part of my community cancer center group. I cannot tell you how she got me through that first year, because having someone, I'm not a religious person, so I can imagine some other people might turn to your faith advisor, spiritual advisor. But for me, she was the person outside my family that I could speak really openly to. And that was so reassuring because I could say anything without fear of being judged. Because of my unique situation and the aggressive nature of my cancer, I couldn't go to support groups. My community center was really more tailored to an older breast cancer patient. And the treatment was so fast and then eventually ended up involving air travel that I didn't have time or energy to meet with a support group. So the few people that I did communicate with that were other patients, younger cancer patients, were actually over email. And that was really great too, because we could just write to each other. And it was really comforting because it was on our own timeline. I think when you're meeting in person, you feel like you need to kind of be on, or it's just a really different relationship when you're over email. And because I'm a writer, that felt really comfortable to me. So there's still two women that really got me through that first year who I've never met in person.
I would like to talk a little more about your journey. How long was your treatment, and how was your physical journey and your emotional journey?
So from the moment I was diagnosed, which was Thanksgiving 2012, I started chemo that December. In January 2013, we discovered that the standard protocol was failing. So my tumor was growing through the treatment. And that's when we began the search for a clinical trial. The clinical trial began in early March 2013. I completed a portion of the trial in June 2013. I had surgery in August 2013. Radiation was 42 days in the fall of 2013. And then I resumed the clinical trial drug that fall. And I remained on that drug, 800 milligrams a day of oral form of chemotherapy, until May 2015. And then in between there, I had reconstructive surgery. And then May 2015 is really the marker of my end of active chemotherapy. And I would say from that day, though, I'll never forget, it took a full year for me to feel like a human being. It was the effects of so many years of chemo were nothing that I could have expected and nothing that anyone talked about.
Plus, when you have little kids, the physical exertion is a lot.
It was so hard. And I talk about that and write about that a lot. The physicality of cancer, not only are you experiencing cancer physically, but the lack of physical contact that treatment creates, that you don't want to be touched, especially in my chest and even your arms, and in your chest with the port. You just don't realize the lack of touch until you don't have it. Thank God I had an amazing family to really hug my kids and when they needed it. And I was able to a little bit, but that was something that I don't think any parent can prepare for.
You have the women on email that your social worker connected you with. What else helped you get through?
I had to, at some point, let laughter in. And I think when you say that to people, obviously there's nothing funny about cancer, but at the same time, you can't possibly get through this kind of journey without some sort of levity and kind of lightness. It's too much darkness. And I would say too, in terms of my background, my family is a joking family. So that was always something that was part of my life was, inserting a joke and here and there. And so for me, finding funny shows and funny podcasts and funny books and really allowing people, giving other people around you permission to laugh is really important because no one's going to go there unless you kind of open the door. The other thing that I learned, I still do it actually, is I set a timer for the pity party. You can complain and you let yourself be down, but you have to set a timer on it. Otherwise, it will just overtake your world. The other thing that helped me, even some of them didn't come true, but I did a kind of a wish list of, when this is over, we're going to do this. So we're going to paint the room, purple, or we're going to take this trip and eat ice cream sundaes all day. It really helps you give something to look forward to.
What about your husband and kids? What could have helped your family and better support them during your journey?
So for my husband, luckily, he has a very close extended family, even though they didn't live close to us. I know he was in communication with them. And then he had a group of guy friends that he was close to. And I think what also helped is my family being close by that allowed him to take some time when he needed it. In addition to, he had to keep working. He owns a small business and that's how we get our health insurance. So in a way, because he loves his work anyway, I think that that was an outlet for him. He was at work and he, 8 to 6 every day. So I think that that helped him. For my kids, having my sister and my nieces around, having people who were able to fill the time and really love them, really keep their lives as normal as possible, which was the most important thing, keep them in ballet and music and just at the playground, the things that I couldn't do. And then what I found out later, I found out about the most important resource is this camp called Camp Kesem. And it is a camp specifically for children whose lives have been, quote, touched by cancer. And so we found out about it when my daughter was 8, I think almost 9. And it's a 1-week free summer camp. So you apply and then they're held all over the US and they're specifically for kids to talk about or not talk about and just be with other kids that are going through the same thing. So that's what I found the most shocking, I think, during my whole cancer experience were all these nonprofits that fill these needs and you might not know about them. And then when you discover them, you just can't imagine how you haven't found them before. So that really helped a lot in terms of my daughter.
I want to switch and talk about some of the things that make your journey a little bit different than what's typically associated with a patient with cancer. There's so many things that you had to deal with as a young adult that you had to go out and seek outside resources to help. A lot of those things you address in your book, like financial health, because you were in the middle stages of income climbing in your life, and marriage and fertility and sexuality. Let's just take a couple of those, like fertility and sexuality for young adults. How can we better help young adults? And what could have someone said to you that would have better supported you or helped you think through some of those things that weren't even addressed in the beginning?
I think bringing up fertility right away is really important because medically and physically, so many treatments can affect your ability to have a child. So not waiting in terms of bringing that up. I was 37. I didn't necessarily want more kids, but it wasn't brought up to me until the conversation about my genetic workup came back and I'm BRCA2 positive, which, as your audience probably knows, the chances of developing breast and ovarian, skin cancer and pancreatic cancer are very high. And so they recommend that you have a prophylactic salpingo oophorectomy. So when that was brought up, that was, maybe 5 months in. And if I had wanted to freeze my eggs, I don't know if that would have been feasible, A, and B, financially. Freezing your eggs, and for men, for sperm, it's expensive. There are a lot of steps that need to be taken. So I think really tuning in with your patient, and if it's not the patient, if it's their family member, whoever you can reach out to, the provider saying, is this something that we need to move forward with, at least bring it up. And then sexuality wise is offering a counselor, I think is so important because you don't realize how much that will impact you. And I was married, but I have plenty of friends who were single, who are divorced, the stories I could tell you, I can't imagine trying to date after, much treatment, especially something like colorectal cancer or things like that, where I've just heard story after story. And I think it's obviously a taboo topic in general. People don't feel that comfortable talking about it, but offering that resource is just a lifeline to this age of cancer patients.
Did you feel you were just so out of the norm that these things weren't addressed by healthcare providers?
Yes, I think understanding the lifestyle of a young adult, whether you're asking, what is the setup of your home? Are you in an apartment? Are you in a walk-up apartment? Are you in a townhouse? Are you not knowing that after surgery, I lived in a house at the time with stairs and I couldn't walk up those stairs up to the kitchen. They want you to move around, obviously, but 3 days after a major surgery, it's impossible. So luckily, I had my sister who had a bedroom with a connected bathroom on one level. And luckily, I was able to go there and recover. But no one ever asked me that. And the second story I like to remind people about with my surgery was I had read that I most likely would need a hospital bed after the surgery because I had I had a double mastectomy, simultaneous salpingo oophorectomy, and 19 lymph nodes removed. So really hard on my body. And I had read that I would most likely need a hospital bed, just easier to get in and out. Well, my surgeon did not sign off on that. She wouldn't sign the form that would allow that to be covered by insurance. She said I wouldn't need it. Well, my family and I decided I would, in fact, need it. So we had to pay out of pocket and then petition the health insurance company to reimburse us. And it turned out, in fact, I did need that bed. And just creating that level of that hurdle was so unnecessary. And just this huge impact on my quality of life that she might not have thought of, but we knew was important. And it's just the small things. And all of these small things really add up to huge impacts on cancer patients' quality of life. I think that the medical professionals are incredible at what they do. They're trained to address the medicine. They're not trained to address, when I go home, can I get out of a bed and use a bathroom? Will I be able to get up a flight of stairs? Should I make sure I don't trip on a Lego? That's not their job. And I understand it's not their job, but then there needs to be someone working with them that is their job. Because otherwise we're asking cancer patients to set up their own system with their family, which luckily I had, but that's completely unrealistic for a majority, I would say, of cancer patients. Given the rise in cancers in our age group, specifically the 21 to 50-year-old cancer patient, it's still so many of my fellow patients that I've spoken to, we're so often misdiagnosed. It's just not on the minds of many oncology groups. And so they're figuring it out too. So I hope that these conversations will become part of the protocol and part of the norm when addressing younger cancer patients. But I think we're all just kind of figuring it out now. I hope in 2 or 3 years, this will just become, a set of questions that we ask. Fertility, kids, sexuality, body image, your setup at home.
Let's talk about the book. This is Cancer, Everything You Need to Know from the Waiting Room to the Bedroom. Why did you decide to write the book and who is it for?
So I decided to write the book for all of the cancer patients and their families who are out there who I thought would be facing the same questions as we did. Everything from how to prepare for chemotherapy to how to prepare to recover from surgery. I mean, all these details that no one really talks about. So that was my audience of, across all cancer types for patients, specifically though, for the younger cancer patient, kind of 21 to 55, who is dealing with the more what I call modern issues of traveling for treatment, marriage and treatment, parenting while bald, parenting while under treatment. And my goal is just ultimately to help other patients and families.
Can you tell us a little bit about your clinical trial and some of the travel barriers that you faced?
Sure. Something that I never thought I would say those words. When I first heard the words clinical trial, I was terrified. I thought of experiments and guinea pigs and, as an English major, science, But when the first standard protocol failed, and then we went to UCSF, the oncologist there said, this is your only hope. This is all we have right now is to find you a clinical trial. I said, okay, where and when? Show me when to show up. And then not realizing that your provider has to apply on your behalf. There are sets of criteria that you have to fulfill in order to qualify for the trial. I had no idea what was involved. Then it took my family to really fight for access to the trial because the trial was closed. I was finally accepted after 30 days of fighting. I got rejected 5 times. I was accepted on a compassionate use waiver. And then the trial that I was accepted into was at City of Hope, which is outside of Los Angeles. And I live outside of San Francisco. And the trial required me to travel every week, either for treatment, scans, or follow-up every single week for an undetermined amount of time. And I couldn't travel alone, so I always needed someone to fly with me. And the physical and emotional and financial costs were unlike anything I could have imagined. I had total strangers donate airline miles to me, hotel points so that I could stay overnight. And just becoming trial subject 985 was something that I couldn't have imagined. I didn't know I would literally become a number. And on top of being a patient, it was very hard emotionally.
Laura, as a survivor, what resources are most important for you to help others?
I think, first of all, for patients to realize that survivorship is its own part of the cancer journey. I never would have imagined. I really looked towards the day of I'm done. And I thought that for so long until I realized, no, this is just another aspect of the journey and you need to settle in and get used to this part as well. And once I could kind of wrap my head around that made it a little bit easier. But physically, getting referrals for physical therapy after my surgery, the long-term effects on my left arm after surgery and radiation, even finding fitness for survivors. I think, we're obviously encouraged to exercise, but it's scary. You don't want to do the wrong thing. You feel different, obviously. So connecting with a local resource on that front was really important. Again, mental health resources, finding a social worker or mental health resources, or maybe a survivor group that helped me as well. And then financially, just planning for the follow-ups of realizing what is going to be involved in your survivor care. I had no idea that I would need, a certain amount of scans or blood work or the appointments or just having that set up. In terms of that, I think the most shocking thing that I always like to bring up is I didn't know who to call if I got strep throat. I didn't have a GP for so long. I ended up in the ER with a bladder infection just because I didn't know who to call. So really making sure that you have a plan and go over that with the last provider, the last part of your cancer care is really important. My radiation oncologist at my community cancer center, she was so incredible. She sat with me for almost an hour at the end of the last appointment and went over things like exercise and, just things that I hadn't even thought about. And what I realize now is that is really quite unusual, that usually cancer patients really have to set up an appointment for that in terms of going over the final checklist of where do we go from here.
You've talked about how to better help a young adult transition to survivorship easier. Finally, what would you say to the audience of providers that's listening when they have a new young adult sitting in front of them with a new diagnosis? How can they better anticipate the needs of that patient?
I think they have an opportunity to connect these young adult cancer patients, particularly in the community setting, is where providers have the opportunity to connect with nonprofits. And what I found is 90% of the problem with finding a nonprofit is connecting them to the patient. So if providers can reach out to their community nonprofits in a very active way, and then have those nonprofits, even in just the most basic way, like a flyer in the waiting room, that's how you will reach the patient. And that's how you will improve the patient experience for your young adult cancer patient, is getting the resources to them. And as a provider, you might not know they need them, but don't rule it out or underestimate what we need as a young adult cancer patient. I never thought I would care about what my brows look like or how I would feel after shaving my head, but it mattered. It mattered a lot. And having a connection with a nonprofit that would help me with a wig or would help me do my brows, or in survivorship, I found survivorship retreats. And I never thought I would be a person who would want to go on a retreat and talk about my cancer journey, but I actually did, and I loved it. And it was one of the most meaningful parts of my journey. The other thing I found through my community center, through a massage therapist there, I went for massage therapy for my lymphedema, and she told me about a local nonprofit who holds a fundraiser that involves a catwalk fashion show that only features survivors and patients who are done with treatment. And so I found out about that and I participated. I cry when I think about it. The friends I made, the experience I felt to feel beautiful again after so many years of being in treatment. And it was just this one thing that was mentioned off the cuff that had such a profound effect on me. So I think realizing the opportunity that they have to connect with these nonprofits and these resources that will really impact your patients in such a profound way.
We'd like to thank Laura Holmes Haddad for sharing her story today and for her dedication to improving cancer care. Thank you for joining us for this episode. If you're enjoying Cancer Buzz, please share the show with a colleague and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Those reviews help us bring important issues in cancer care to the greater oncology community. Next week on Cancer Buzz, we return to our special series on cancer care during the COVID-19 pandemic to take a look at how cancer programs can adapt and continue their screening and prevention efforts. You'll get that episode delivered right to you if you subscribe to Cancer Buzz for free on your favorite podcast platform. Until then, for the entire Cancer Buzz team, I'm Summer Johnson.
Cancer Buzz is a resource of the Association of Community Cancer Centers.